A group of rowdy bikers swarmed the sleek black Porsche parked at a desolate highway stop. Inside was Layla Montenegro, the glamorous daughter of one of the country's richest men. They thought she was an easy target, laughing as they blocked her path. But as they jeered, a mysterious figure emerged from the shadows. Her father, Raul Montenegro, once a feared underground enforcer, had followed her to ensure her safety. What happened next would leave the bikers begging for mercy, stunned by his dark past. Layla Montenegro stepped out of her sleek black Porsche, adjusting her sunglasses against the harsh sun. This solo road trip was her act of rebellion, freedom from the gilded cage of her father's wealth. Raul Montenegro, one of the country's richest men, had reluctantly agreed to let her go, but insisted she take the Porsche, equipped with GPS and safety features. Even from afar, her father couldn't stop protecting her. At a small, run-down gas station, Layla caught the attention of a group of bikers lounging near their motorcycles. Their leader, a burly man with a snake tattoo curling up his neck, smirked as he eyed her. "Look at that car. Bet she doesn't even know how to pump gas," he muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. His companions laughed, their gazes fixed on her. Layla ignored them, focusing on refueling. She had grown used to the stares her wealth attracted, but felt uneasy under their leering eyes. Sliding back into the Porsche, she drove off, hoping to leave them and their mocking laughter behind. Unbeknownst to her, the bikers weren't done. They followed her onto the highway, their engines roaring like a pack of predators closing in on prey. At first, she thought it was coincidence, but her stomach sank as they pulled up closer. One biker, his face covered by a skull bandana, rapped on her window. "Pull over, princess," he yelled, his grin sending chills down her spine. Panic surged through her. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, accelerating in hopes of losing them. But they only saw it as a game, matching her speed and taunting her. The leader swerved his bike in front of her car, forcing her to slam on the brakes. The Porsche skidded to a halt, dust billowing around it. The bikers circled her car, their laughter echoing in the desolate expanse. "Come on out, rich girl. We just want to chat," one of them sneered, tapping the window with the butt of a knife. Layla's hands trembled as she locked the doors and searched for her phone. No signal. Her chest tightened as reality sank in. She was alone, trapped. But she wasn't as alone as she thought. Raul Montenegro, ever the vigilant father, had been trailing her from a distance. Despite her insistence on independence, his instincts wouldn't let him stay away. Seeing the bikers harass his daughter awakened something buried deep within him, a part of himself he had tried to leave behind. Raul parked his car a short distance away and stepped out with deliberate calm. Dressed in unassuming slacks and a button-up shirt, he looked like any other middle-aged man. But his measured movements hinted at something far more dangerous. Years of wealth and respectability had softened his image, but not the skills he had honed in a past life. The bikers didn't notice him until his voice, sharp and commanding, broke through their laughter. "Leave her alone." The leader turned, sizing him up. To him, Raul seemed like just another meddling father, powerless against a gang. But there was something in Raul's eyes, a cold, unyielding intensity that made him hesitate. The air grew thick with tension as Raul took another step forward. The bikers didn't realize it yet, but they had just picked the wrong man to cross. Raul Montenegro's voice cut through the air, freezing the bikers mid-laugh. The leader, his snake tattoo glinting in the sun, sneered. "And who the hell are you, old man?" he asked, stepping closer. The others chuckled, but some hesitated, uneasy with the man's calm demeanor. "I'm someone you don't want to test," Raul said coldly. His eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto the leader's with unnerving intensity. Layla, trapped in her car, watched her father in shock. Relief mingled with disbelief. Why was he here? And how had he known to follow her? The leader tilted his head, smirking. "You think you're some kind of hero? Gonna save the princess?" He gestured toward Layla's Porsche. "We're just having fun. Walk away, Grandpa, before you get hurt." Raoul took a step closer, his stance unflinching. "This is your only warning," he said quietly. "Leave." The bikers roared with laughter. The leader pulled a switchblade from his pocket, spinning it casually. "And what are you gonna do about it?" he taunted. Before he could blink, Raoul closed the distance between them. His hand shot out, gripping the leader's wrist in an iron hold. The switchblade clattered to the ground as Raoul twisted his arm, forcing him to his knees with a cry of pain. The bikers fell silent, their confidence evaporating. "I told you to leave," Raoul said, his voice low and firm. He released the leader, who stumbled back, clutching his wrist. Embarrassment burned in his eyes as he barked, "Get him!" The gang surged forward, but Raoul moved with precision, a ghost of his former self unleashed. He dodged a swing and countered with a punch that sent the biker crumpling to the ground. Another came at him with a chain, but Raoul sidestepped, using his momentum to send him sprawling. Layla sat frozen in her car, watching her father dismantle the gang with a mix of fear and awe. This wasn't the calm, composed businessman she knew. This was someone entirely different, someone dangerous. As the remaining bikers hesitated, Raoul straightened, his breathing steady. "Enough," he said. "Take your friends and go." The leader, still nursing his wrist, spat on the ground. "You're gonna regret this, old man. You don't know who you're messing with." Raoul's gaze didn't waver. "Neither do you." The bikers exchanged uncertain glances before retreating. They picked up their fallen comrades and rode off, their engines fading into the distance. Layla stepped out of her car, her legs shaky. "Dad, how did you—" Raoul's expression softened. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. She shook her head, still stunned. "No, but what just happened?" Raoul sighed, the weight of the moment settling on him. "Get in the car," he said. "We'll talk, but not here." Layla obeyed, her mind racing as she slid back into the Porsche. As they pulled onto the highway, silence filled the space between them. She couldn't stop replaying what she had just seen. Her father, quiet, reserved, and protective, had transformed into someone she didn't recognize. Who was he, really? Raoul, his jaw tight, kept his eyes on the road. He knew this conversation would come, but he wasn't ready for it. Not yet. For now, the only thing he cared about was keeping his daughter safe. The truth could wait, at least for a little while longer. The hum of the Porsche's engine filled the silence between Raoul and Layla. She glanced at her father, his knuckles white on the wheel, his face unreadable. Minutes earlier, he had fought off a gang of bikers with precision and control that defied everything she knew about him. The man sitting beside her was a stranger, a dangerous one. "Dad? What just happened back there?" she asked, breaking the silence. "That wasn't normal." Raoul sighed but kept his eyes on the road. "You were in trouble. I did what I had to do." "That's not what I mean," Layla pressed. "You fought like you've done it before, like you knew exactly what you were doing." She hesitated, her voice trembling. "Who are you, really?" Raoul hesitated, his jaw tightening. "There are things about my past I've never told you," he said quietly. "Things I hoped you'd never have to know." Layla leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What things? Were you in a gang or something?" "No," Raoul said, his voice heavy. "I was an enforcer. I collected debts, settled scores, made problems disappear. I did things I'm not proud of." The confession hit Layla like a blow. "You hurt people?" Raoul nodded, his eyes clouded with regret. "It was a brutal life, one I thought I'd left behind when I built this life for us. I promised your mother I'd change, and I did. But today, I couldn't stand by." Layla stared at him, struggling to reconcile this man with the father she thought she knew. "Did Mom know about all of it?" "She knew enough," Raoul admitted, "but I kept the worst of it from her, from you. I didn't want my past touching your life." Then why follow me today? Layla asked, her voice trembling. Did you think something like this would happen? Raoul hesitated, then nodded. I've been hearing whispers, names from my past, people who might want to use you to get to me. I couldn't let you go off on your own without making sure you were safe. Layla's stomach churned. So what? Someone's after us. It's possible, Raoul said. And if it's true, you need to trust me. No more solo trips. No more risks. Layla wanted to argue, to push back, but the memory of the biker's attack silenced her. She nodded slowly. Okay, but I want the truth from now on. No more secrets. Raoul pulled into a quiet rest stop, parking the Porsche. He turned to her, his face softening. You'll have it. I promise. Layla stared at him, her mind racing. The man she thought she knew was gone. In his place stood someone darker, more dangerous. The quiet of the rest stop only deepened her unease. Raoul's eyes scanned their surroundings, instincts from his past life kicking in. He had spent years burying that part of himself, but it was clear now. The past wasn't finished with him, and this time, it had pulled his daughter into its crosshairs. As Layla leaned back in her seat, the weight of her father's confession settled over her. Questions swirled in her mind, each more unsettling than the last. But one thought stood out among the chaos. The man she called her father had secrets, and she wasn't sure she wanted to know them all. The rest stop was quiet, save for the occasional hum of passing cars. Raoul sat at a picnic table under a tree, his fingers drumming lightly on the wood. Layla stood a few feet away, arms crossed, glaring at him like he was a stranger. You can't just drop that bomb and expect me to sit quietly, she said sharply. Raoul gestured for her to sit. I knew this day would come. I just didn't think it would be today. Layla hesitated but sat across from him, her eyes never leaving his face. You hid it all these years. Why? You let me think you were just some brilliant businessman. Was it all a lie? No, Raoul said firmly. I worked hard for what we have, but I built it on a foundation I'm not proud of. Everything I've done since has been to protect you and your mother. Protect us from what? From who? Layla pressed. Those bikers, was that random, or are we in danger because of you? Raoul's expression darkened. The world I left behind doesn't let go easily, Layla. The leader's tattoo, it's tied to a group I used to deal with. If they're active again, it's only a matter of time before they figure out who I am. Layla felt a chill creep over her. So, what happens now? Are we just supposed to wait for them to come after us? No, Raoul said, his voice steely. We prepare. I'll use every resource I have to make sure they never get close to you. Layla frowned, the weight of his words sinking in. You can't just fight them all off, Dad. This isn't an action movie. Raoul's lips twitched in a faint smile. I'm not planning to fight anyone unless I have to, but I won't sit idly by either. The crunch of gravel drew their attention. A car pulled into the rest stop, its old sedan creaking to a halt near the vending machines. Raoul's posture stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he subtly shifted to keep the vehicle in view. Layla noticed his change immediately. What is it? She whispered. Stay here, Raoul said, rising to his feet. His movements were calm but deliberate. The driver stepped out of the car. A man wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low. His casual demeanor didn't fool Raoul. Raoul approached him with measured steps, his gaze scanning the man's hands and movements. Nice day, isn't it? The man said, his smile tight. Raoul's voice was icy. Sure, but you're not here for the weather, are you? The man chuckled, raising his hands in mock surrender. Relax, old man. I'm just passing through. Then keep passing, Raoul said, his voice lowering. And if you or anyone else gets near my daughter, you'll regret it. The man's smile faltered, and for a moment tension hung heavy between them. Then he nodded, stepping back. Message received. The man climbed back into his car and drove off, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. Raoul stood there for a moment, his shoulders relaxing slightly before he turned back to Layla. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Someone testing the waters," Raoul said grimly, "and they just got their answer." Layla's chest tightened. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Her father wasn't just protecting her from a distant past. That past was closing in, and it wasn't going to let them go without a fight. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the highway as Raoul and Layla drove in tense silence. The encounter at the rest stop had shaken them both, though neither wanted to admit it. Layla stared out the window, her thoughts racing. Finally, she broke the quiet. "What happens if they come back?" "They will," Raoul said simply. "It's not a matter of if, but when." Her stomach twisted. "So, what's the plan? We can't just keep running forever." Raoul's grip tightened on the wheel. "We won't. I have a safe house, a place they won't find. We'll go there tonight." Layla turned to him incredulous. "A safe house? You actually have something like that?" Raoul nodded. "You don't leave the life I did without expecting it to catch up eventually." As the sun disappeared, Raoul turned onto a dirt path. The headlights illuminated a small cabin at the end of the trail, plain and unassuming. It was the last place anyone would think to look for Raoul Montenegro. Inside, the cabin was sparse, a table, a few chairs, and a duffel bag in the corner. Raoul locked the door and unzipped the bag, revealing a handgun, ammunition, and other tools. Layla's breath caught. "You were really ready for this," she said softly. "I had to be," Raoul replied. "This place is off the grid. We'll be safe here for now." "For now," Layla echoed, her voice trembling. "And then what? Are we just going to live here forever?" "No," Raoul said. "This is temporary. I need time to figure out who's pulling the strings. Once I do, we'll deal with it." Layla frowned. "We? This is your mess, Dad. You can't drag me into this." Raoul's gaze hardened. "You're already in it, Layla. To them, you're leverage. That's why you need to trust me." Layla wanted to argue but stayed silent. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling as Raoul began checking the locks and setting up a motion detector by the door. Watching him move with such precision made her realize how little she knew about the man who had raised her. Hours passed in silence before Raoul sat across from her, his expression softening. "I know this is overwhelming," he said, "but I need you to be strong. I need you to trust me." "I do," Layla said quietly, though she wasn't sure if it was entirely true. Before Raoul could respond, a faint noise outside shattered the stillness. He raised a hand, signaling silence, and moved to the window. Layla's heart pounded as she strained to hear, her mind racing. Raoul grabbed the handgun and cracked the door open, stepping into the night. Layla stayed frozen, fear gripping her. Moments passed before Raoul returned, his face grim. "What is it?" she whispered. "Tracks," Raoul said. "Someone was here." Layla's blood ran cold. "Do they know we're here?" "Not yet," Raoul said. "But they're looking, and if they find us, we need to be ready." Layla nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. The nightmare wasn't just Raoul's past, it was her present, and it was only beginning. The cabin was silent, save for the occasional creak of wood as the wind pressed against the walls. Raoul stood by the window, his eyes scanning the darkness outside. Layla sat on the edge of her chair, her heart still pounding from his announcement. Someone had been there, searching. "Are you sure they didn't see us?" Layla whispered. "Not yet," Raoul replied, his voice steady, "but they're close." Layla shook her head, trying to process everything. "Why now? You said you left this life years ago. Why are they coming after you now?" Raoul leaned against the table, his expression grim. "The people I dealt with, They don't forget. If someone's pulling strings, they think I still have something they want." "Like what?" Layla asked, frustration bubbling over. "What could possibly be worth this?" Raoul hesitated. "Power, revenge, money. It doesn't matter. They'll do anything to get it." Layla stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "So, we just hide? That's your plan?" "For now," Raoul said firmly. "Until I know who's behind this, we can't take unnecessary risks." Layla crossed her arms, her anger barely masking her fear. "I can't sit here waiting for someone to find us. It's suffocating." Raoul's expression softened, his voice low. "I know it's hard, Layla, but I need you to trust me. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you." Before she could respond, a faint beep came from the motion detector by the door. Both of them froze. Raoul grabbed the handgun from the table, his movements deliberate. He motioned for Layla to stay back. Her heart raced as Raoul peered through the peephole. "Stay here," he whispered, slipping outside. The door closed softly behind him. Layla gripped the chair tightly, her knuckles white. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one more agonizing than the last. She strained to hear, but the only sound was her heartbeat. A muffled noise, a grunt and the crunch of leaves, shattered the silence. Layla's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run to the door, but fear rooted her in place. When the door finally creaked open, Raoul stepped back inside, locking it behind him. He placed the gun on the table and sat down. "What happened?" Layla asked, her voice trembling. Raoul's expression was grim. "It was just a scout," he said, "checking to see if anyone's here." "Did they see you?" "No," Raoul replied. "But they'll know someone's been here soon. We need to be ready." Layla swallowed hard. "What happens when they come back?" Raoul met her gaze, his voice cold. "When they come back, we make sure they don't leave." His words sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't the father she knew. This was a man forged by violence, a man who would do whatever it took to survive. And for the first time, Layla realized she wasn't just a bystander, she was a target. As Raoul fortified the cabin, Layla watched him, her fear mingling with resolve. Whatever was coming, she wouldn't let it destroy them. She couldn't. The fight wasn't over. It had barely begun. Morning came with no relief, only a suffocating silence around the cabin. Layla sat at the table, gripping a cup of coffee Raoul had made. She hadn't touched it. Sleep had been impossible, the thought of the scout outside haunting her. Raoul moved methodically, fortifying the cabin with tripwires and barricades. At the table, he spread out a map, his focus unshaken. "You're planning something," Layla said, her voice hoarse. Raoul didn't look up. "Waiting here forever isn't an option." "So what are you going to do? Storm their hideout?" "If I knew where they were, I might," Raoul replied. "You're not serious," Layla muttered, her hands trembling. "I am," Raoul said, his tone cold. "They know about you now. That changes everything." Layla hated the weight of his words. She wasn't collateral anymore. She was a target. "What's your plan?" "I'll draw them out," Raoul said. "Force them to come to me before they get the upper hand." "That sounds suicidal," Layla said. "It won't be, but it's dangerous. You'll stay here." He folded the map and stood. "There's a town 30 miles from here. If I make noise there, they'll follow." "You're leaving me here? Alone?" "What if they come back?" Layla snapped. "They won't," Raoul said. "Not yet. They'll need time to regroup." "And if you don't come back?" Raoul paused at the door. "I will." Layla watched him leave, her chest tight with fear and anger. The cabin felt emptier, colder. Hours crawled by as she paced, her mind spiraling into worst-case scenarios. Spotting the handgun Raoul had left, she picked it up, her fingers trembling. She aimed shakily, practicing. The weight of the gun felt foreign, but it gave her a strange sense of control. The cold metal reminded her that, for now, she had only herself to rely on. She had no idea how long she stood there, her thoughts racing, when the crunch of gravel outside snapped her back to reality. Her pulse spiked as she peeked through the window. A black SUV had pulled up outside. 2 men stepped out, one holding a rifle. They moved with deliberate precision, scanning the cabin's perimeter. Layla's breath hitched as panic clawed at her chest. She ducked low, moving toward the barricaded door. Her breathing was shallow, her hands clammy as she gripped the gun. She willed herself to stay calm, but the fear was overwhelming. The men spoke in low voices, their words muffled but urgent. The doorknob rattled, and Layla flinched. She raised the gun, her finger hovering over the trigger. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. A sudden crash from the back of the cabin made her jump. Her heart pounded as she realized what was happening. They were trying to break in. Her mind raced. What would Raoul do? She didn't have his skills, his experience, but she couldn't freeze. She couldn't let them win. She pressed herself against the wall, the weight of the gun grounding her. The voices outside grew louder, and she heard heavy footsteps near the back door. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she tried to remember everything Raoul had told her. Fight or flee? She didn't know if she could do either. The battle Raoul had warned her about had arrived, and she was on her own. The cabin shrank as footsteps drew closer. Layla gripped the gun tightly, her heart pounding. The voices outside were low and deliberate. The men weren't rushing. They were searching. The doorknob rattled again, then silence. Layla crouched low, her breath shallow. A loud crash at the back of the cabin made her jump. She spun around, pointing the gun toward the sound. The barricaded door was holding for now, but splintering wood told her it wouldn't last. She pressed herself against the wall, her mind racing. Fight or flee? The cabin was surrounded. She grabbed a flashlight and spare ammunition, her trembling fingers fumbling. Another crash. This time, the back door gave way. Layla stifled a gasp as the first man stepped inside, his rifle raised. He moved slowly, scanning the room. "Nobody's here," he muttered to someone outside. "But someone's been here." She had seconds to act. The man turned his back to her, moving toward the front door. Layla raised the gun, her hands shaking. Raoul's voice echoed in her mind. "If you hesitate, you lose." Her finger pressed the trigger. The gunshot was deafening. The man staggered, dropping his rifle before falling to the floor. Layla gasped, her ears ringing, but the sound of the shot had drawn the others. A second man stormed inside, spraying bullets. Layla dove behind a table as splinters flew. Her hands shook as she scrambled to reload, every nerve screaming at her to move faster. "Come out," the man shouted. "You can't hide forever." Layla steadied herself, fear giving way to determination. She peeked out and fired. The shot missed but forced him into cover. She crawled toward a corner, grabbing a knife Raoul had left behind. The front door burst open and another man entered, his rifle raised. Layla's heart raced. Outnumbered and outgunned, she refused to freeze. She darted between cover, firing when she could. One of her shots grazed a man's leg, making him stumble. The intruders shouted to each other, their words lost in the chaos. Then she heard it, a familiar roar. Raoul's car screeched to a halt outside the cabin. Gunfire erupted as Raoul burst in, his movements swift and precise. In seconds, he disarmed one man and incapacitated another with ruthless efficiency. The remaining intruder hesitated, his weapon trembling. "Drop it," Raoul growled. The man obeyed, his face pale. Raoul tied him up and turned to Layla, his eyes scanning her. "Are you hurt?" Layla shook her head, her hands trembling. I shot someone," she whispered. Raoul placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did what you had to do, and you survived. That's what matters." She nodded, though the weight of what she had done pressed heavily on her chest. As Raoul began securing the cabin and checking the tied-up intruders, Layla sat down, her thoughts a blur. The fight wasn't over, and she knew it. Whatever Raoul had been running from was no longer distant. It was here, and now there was no turning back. The tension in the cabin was suffocating. Raoul paced, his boots hitting the floor in deliberate steps. The two intruders, tied to the table, kept their heads down. Blood smeared one man's face, and the other flinched every time Raoul got close. Layla sat in the corner, the gun resting on her lap. Her hands were steady now, but her mind wasn't. She couldn't stop replaying the moment she pulled the trigger. She hadn't wanted to shoot, but there had been no choice. Raoul stopped, crouching in front of the uninjured man. "Who sent you?" The man refused to speak, staring at the floor. Raoul's jaw tightened as he turned to the other intruder. "I'll ask again. Who sent you?" The injured man smirked, blood on his teeth. "You think we're scared of you? You can't stop him. He's coming." Raoul slammed his hand on the table, making Layla jump. "I wasn't asking if you're scared," he said coldly. "I'm asking if you want to live." The words hung in the air. For the first time, the defiance in the injured man's eyes wavered. Layla leaned forward, her heart racing. Raoul's tone had shifted, colder and sharper than she'd ever heard. "I know who you're working for," Raoul continued, "and I know he won't care if you fail. But if you talk, maybe I'll let you leave. Stay silent, and I'll make sure your boss knows you failed. Do you think he'll forgive that?" The other man broke first. "It's Rivas," he blurted, his voice trembling. "He put a bounty on you." Raoul's expression darkened. "How far behind is he?" "Not far," the man admitted. "Maybe a day. He's sending everyone after you." Raoul stood, his gaze icy. "And you led them here." The intruder's face paled. "We didn't." "You did," Raoul interrupted. He turned to Layla. "Pack what you can. We're leaving." Layla grabbed the bag Raoul had prepared, her legs shaky. "Where will we go?" "Somewhere they won't expect," Raoul said, grabbing the supplies. He glanced at the intruders, his voice cold. "They'll stay here." Layla hesitated but followed him outside. The night air was sharp and the woods felt alive with unseen dangers. As they approached the car, she stopped, her voice a whisper. "Raoul, wait." Before he could respond, distant voices broke the silence. Shadows moved between the trees. Raoul's gun was in his hand instantly. "Go," he ordered, pushing her toward the car. Layla ran, diving into the passenger seat as gunfire erupted behind her. Raoul fired back, his movements precise and calm. The car roared to life, and they sped away, dirt kicking up as they tore down the road. Layla glanced back, her breath hitching as the cabin disappeared into the darkness. "We can't outrun them forever," she said. Raoul's knuckles whitened on the wheel. "We don't need to outrun them," he said grimly. "We just need to finish this." His words hit her like a weight. This wasn't just about running anymore. It was about facing the storm head-on. And Layla wasn't sure either of them would make it out alive. The car sped down the highway, its engine roaring. Layla gripped her seatbelt, her heart racing as Raoul's knuckles whitened on the wheel. His words lingered. "We need to finish this." "Where are we going?" she asked. Raoul's eyes stayed on the road. "Somewhere we control the fight. Rivas wants us. We'll give him what he's looking for." Layla's stomach churned. "You're walking into his trap." "No," Raoul replied. "He's walking into mine." Minutes later, they turned onto a dirt road leading to an abandoned quarry. The moonlight bathed the jagged cliffs in an eerie glow. Raoul stepped out, scanning the area. "We'll end it here." "What do we do?" Layla asked, gripping the gun he'd returned to her. "Set the trap," Raoul said. He opened the trunk, revealing weapons and supplies. Together, they prepared using the quarry's natural terrain. Raoul explained each step calmly, his focus unshakable. Layla followed his instructions, her fear giving way to determination. Hours passed before the sound of engines broke the silence. Headlights pierced the darkness as vehicles rolled into the quarry. Men spilled out, armed and ready, their leader emerging last. Even at a distance, Rivas's presence was suffocating. "Raul Montenegro," Rivas called, his voice echoing. "You've been running for years. Did you think you could escape me?" Raul stepped into the open. "I wasn't running," he said. "I was waiting for the right moment." Rivas sneered. "This? You're outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender, and maybe I'll let your daughter live." Layla's blood boiled, but Raul raised a hand, signaling her to wait. "You underestimated me, Rivas," he said. "Big mistake." Raul detonated an explosive hidden in the rocks. The blast threw Rivas's men into chaos. Layla fired at the disoriented intruders while Raul moved like a shadow, taking them down with ruthless precision. The fight was brutal. Layla's hands shook as she fired, her ears ringing with each shot. She hit one man in the shoulder, disarming him. Raul cleared a path through the remaining attackers, his focus unwavering. Rivas shouted orders, trying to regain control, but his men were falling fast. Soon, only Rivas remained. He raised his weapon, rage twisting his face. "Enough," Rivas shouted. "This ends now." Raul aimed his gun. "You're right, it does." Before Rivas could fire, a shot rang out. His weapon dropped as he fell, eyes wide with shock. Layla stood frozen, her arms trembling. She had fired first. Raul approached, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said. Tears blurred her vision, but she nodded. As the sun rose over the quarry, Raul and Layla stood side by side, their silhouettes outlined against the light. They had survived, and together they would face whatever came next. For now, the storm had passed.